we're all probably part of an accidental vice grip situation at one point or another.
Welcome to Leaders of the West, a podcast for innovators and changemakers. I'm your host, Jessie Jarvis, the founder of the West, and I'm sitting down with agriculturalists, entrepreneurs, executives, and everyone in between with the goal of digging into the strategies, mindsets, and lessons that have been crucial to the success of ag and Western. Whether you're carrying on the next generation of your family's operation, starting something from scratch, or determined to climb up the leadership ladder, we're going to inspire you to continue to dream big, growing not just you, but the future of agriculture and Western as a whole. Let's go.
Have you ever opened up an old resume and laughed at what you found? I did that the other day. I found one from years ago and it looked like it was a middle school essay. It was too wordy. It didn't have great structure. It was more than a page and it had zero personality. And I remember thinking at the time, this is the greatest resume that I've ever created. And now looking back, it's probably not a surprise that I didn't get called back from that position. Most of us start out that way. We throw words on paper, hoping that they're going to stick. But here's the thing that I have learned after seeing thousands of resumes across my desk. And that is that good people don't get interviews just because they're qualified. They get them because they know how to show that they're qualified. And that is exactly why we made a little guide called 10 resume mistakes that could cost you the job and how to fix them. It's simple, it's free, and it's all the stuff that I wish somebody would have told me back when I was trying to figure out how to get noticed without sounding like a robot. So if you are in the middle of a job hunt or you just want to be ready for whatever comes next and you know that it's been a while since you've spruced up that resume, you can grab that free guide at the link that's here in the bottom of our show notes. Trust me, you guys, your future self is going to thank you. Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders of the West. I am so very honored to have you guys here, as always. I will tell you, though, I feel like I'm a little nervous today, partly because this is actually the very first solo episode that I have recorded in the year 2026. It has been a minute, so I feel like I'm a little rusty, but in the words of, was it Gene Autry or Roy Rogers? Either way, I am back in the saddle again. So here we go. One of the reasons, though, that I have just been a little bit behind, to be honest, in recording solo podcasts is right after Christmas, we started the process of getting a new roof put on our house. And so I have a home office, as many of you do. And let me tell you what, the month that process took, it was a long one, only because it's really hard to take meetings or do something like record podcasts when you have people walking around on the roof or banging around on the roof, which I am very thankful. We now have a beautiful leak-free tin roof on our home. Very, very grateful for that. Also very grateful to no longer have a construction crew around so that I don't actually have to take meetings in my car. I also was a guest on a couple of podcasts over that time, and I took those in the car. One of them, my parents were gone, so I ran up to their house to record that episode. So it's been a little bit of a trip. So I'm very thankful to be back in my office, back with you guys. And I hope that you guys are going to enjoy this episode today. I know I've shared this with you guys before. I am a reader and I have been all of my life. And I will say, I think that even though anybody who has a love for books, I think it is very common for you to have not loved your assigned reading that they gave us in high school. I think that's, again, a very common thing because we like to read the stuff that we like to read, not necessarily the stuff that our teachers want us to read. And actually, I think that there are only 3 books that I ever remember being given as assigned reading. Like, that's how less than memorable they were to me because, again, it's not what I would have picked. One of those was The Hatchet. I think I read that in middle school, but I feel like that's one of those books that everybody reads. So that's the only reason that I remember that. And the other 2 I read when I was in high school. The first was Of Mice and Men, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then the other was when I was a senior in high school, we read The Alchemist. And that is still to this day one of my very favorite books in life. I think a lot of that just had to do with the timing of life when we were reading it. It was the spring before we were going off to graduate, which is why the teacher assigned it then. But I think that that is one of those books that a person could honestly reread probably every 5 years, 10 years, and love it just as much. It's going to mean something to you regardless of what journey you're in. So if you've not read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I highly encourage you guys to do so. But back to Of Mice and Men. The book is by John Steinbeck, and it's set in the 1930s in the middle of the Great Depression. And the story's two main characters are George and Lenny, and they're farm workers in California. George and Lenny, though, they are complete opposites. So George is a very small guy, kind of a petite man, and he's known throughout the book as being very smart, very quick-witted. He is the leader of the two, and he's seen as Lenny's guardian, partly because Lenny, who is, again, the opposite of George, he's a very large guy, super strong. He's also mentally challenged. So one of the more memorable scenes in the book is when George finds out that Lenny has been carrying a dead mouse in his pocket, continuing to pet it after the mouse is dead. So what we assume kind of happens is that Lenny finds this mouse, he loves the mouse, it's soft, he likes soft things, and ultimately he wants it to be his friend. And Lenny's not just going to put the mouse in his pocket and leave it there because he's afraid that if he does that, he's going to let go of it and it's going to run off. So instead, he has this bare paw-sized hand and it tightens its grip, and unknowingly, he squeezes the life out of the mouse. And in the book, Lenny really struggles to understand the impact of those actions, particularly when his strength really unintentionally harms the things that he touches. He can't figure out how he killed the mouse because he didn't hate the mouse, he loved the mouse. I have a feeling that some of you are like, wow, Jessie, this is really coming out of left field. What are we doing talking about Of Mice and Men? But if you were to take that text for face value, you would be led to believe that the reason that this happened, that the mouse died, is because the picture that was painted of Lenny. So he's very big, he's very strong, he's mentally disabled. But the squeezing of the mouse has absolutely nothing to do with that. It easily could have been done by somebody who was the polar opposite of him, just like George was. And this brings me to why I'm even giving you guys this example today, because again, I do feel like it comes a little bit out of left field, but this is something that happens all of the time. How we unknowingly suck the life out of things that we love very, very dearly, all because we are holding on to them so tightly that they can no longer get the air that is needed for them to be able to survive. This is something that I have seen in every facet of life, from marriages to friendships, businesses with business owners, in careers with employees and their leaders, in community groups. This is something that happens everywhere. And again, very, very unknowingly. So to give you a specific example, one that is tied directly to our industry, I'm going to have you guys close your eyes. Unless you're driving, then please do not close your eyes. But I just want you to picture this. There's 2, maybe 3 generations of a family on a family farm. And the eldest generation, they're in their 70s, maybe their 80s, heck, maybe even in their 90s. Whatever age, it's old enough to where they're not necessarily the generation that's putting in the majority of the work, but they're still in charge, and that's great. They have been in charge for decades, maybe since they created it from that very first seed, or maybe when their parents handed it down to them. It has been a very well-oiled machine, and they have built a great operation. But as we all know, as time goes on, things are going to change, especially when it comes to business. And that's one of the things that the younger generation typically brings to the table a bit more, are those progressive ideas, because they're at the age where they see them, they easily understand them, and they also know that they need to continue to push the needle forward, which does not mean keeping things as they've always been before. So in this situation, the eldest generation thinks that they can still do anything and everything that's needed for their business, but the reality is they probably can't. And that doesn't make them any less of an owner or any less of a successful business owner. That is just part of nature. But that's literally all they've ever known. And they don't want to give up that control because to them, it means that they're weak. They aren't at the top of their game. So what do? Instead of releasing their grip so that the next generation in line can offer new ideas, can take over some of the management, whatever that may be, they do the very opposite. They squeeze things even tighter as to not let it fall apart. They start telling the people who work alongside them not just what to do, but exactly how to do it from start to finish. They critique every single thing that they didn't personally have their hand in, just to prove a point that they could have done it better, even though the end result likely would have been no different. The only thing that changed were the steps that were taken to get there. So now that next generation that's present on the farm has even a tighter grip around them. What is happening to them in that moment? They're having a harder time getting air. And air in this example is not actually air in their lungs. It's passion, creativity, general brain power, because they're no longer using their own head when they're being given basically a direction manual for how everything needs to be done. Now, we know everything needs some form of oxygen or carbon dioxide in the example of a plant to survive. And if over time less oxygen is present, the more damage that is going to be caused to the brain, which in this case is actually the spirit. If people can't breathe, they lose passion, they aren't using their brains, the elder generation sees those results, they're disgusted because, hello, how dare you? They're afraid and they feel like things are falling apart. So what are they going to do? You got it. They continue to tighten their grip a little bit more and a little bit more, unaware that every time they do so, they are literally causing the result that they're trying to combat. They start making more decisions, maybe even some poor business decisions, which sucks more air, and so on and so forth until that operation is basically crushed from the inside out. And ironically enough, just with that element alone, making all of the business decisions, then what happens? They're taking away those teachable learning moments that we all have to have in order to grow. So it is very logical that yes, the operation in question in this example is not going to make it past the elder generation because the generation that's next didn't have enough opportunity to learn by doing. And that is exactly the thing that the elder individual didn't want to have happen. That is the thing that they were absolutely fearful of. And now it's basically inevitable. Now, if you guys have any connection to a farm or ranch, which you probably do considering the audience of this show, that example probably makes you a little bit sick. I know it does me. I have lived it and it is soul crushing. But that is just one of the many examples of how we can unconsciously suck the air out of things, the people, the relationships, the work, the businesses, the causes that we are so desperately trying to keep alive. We are literally causing the effect that we are working day in and day out to prevent. Maybe it's because we're afraid that the opportunity is going to go away. Maybe it's a fear that we're not enough. Maybe it's the fear that we're going to lose control. Maybe it's a fear that if we loosen our grip just a little, everything is going to fall apart right out of our hands. Now, is the cost of over-gripping something as grave as I made it out to be in that farm-specific example? I'm going to say probably not. But squeezing the life out of something still absolutely has its consequences. Maybe in the workplace, it's something like you're choking out somebody's strategic thinking or their creativity. Maybe it's missing really good opportunities because you find yourself caught in tunnel vision. Maybe it is operating from panic or fear instead of clarity or confidence. And if you're operating from panic and fear, you're not making good decisions. Or maybe the pressure that you're feeling is the pressure that you're actually causing for yourself. We don't lose opportunities when we loosen our grip. We lose opportunities because we choke them out before they ever have a chance to grow. And if only Lenny had realized that by giving the mouse a warm, cozy spot to hang out in his pocket without that constant bear paw-sized grip, or if he had left him in his original environment and visited him when he needed a friend, the mouse and the man could have lived alongside one another. As I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, we're all probably part of an accidental vice grip situation at one point or another. Maybe it is you as the parent trying to mold your child to love the same sports that you do, to excel the way that you did, or maybe live the 2.0 version of the life that you once had. I know I've caught myself doing that personally. In your marriage, it could be trying to make all of the decisions for your household, never taking the time to ask your spouse for their opinion on the matter. I feel like I'm probably a little guilty of that as well. At work, it could be expecting your team to work exactly the way you do, not remembering that the reason you hired your team is that they hopefully have superpowers that you don't, and vice versa. You wonder why they don't ever seem to think for themselves, and it's actually because you get on their case every time they do something that isn't exactly how you would do it, even if the end result was the same. Maybe you have done something like you've brought life back to a community library or to a rec group or to an ag organization, and you're unwilling to let anybody else come in and offer meaningful and measurable help because you're so worried that if you lessen your control, things are going to fall apart again. And regardless of the example or the situation, it's actually the opposite of that is true. We've all heard that saying how sometimes when you love something, you have to let it go, because that's what allows it to have space to come back to you in a very harmonious, holistic way. So what exactly does that look like in real life? I think that is allowing things to have space to unfold, focusing on the right next step instead of all of the possible outcomes, building systems so you don't have to white knuckle everything. I think that's a big deal, especially when it comes to leading a team. Sometimes it's also letting good enough be good enough. I am a big believer in doing things with your full ASS, right? We are not putting out anything that is less than perfect, but sometimes good enough is good enough. And we really have to realize that, because that then allows us to allow for imperfection without spiraling, which is something else that's really crucial when it comes to just lessening your grip on things. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to with the example of mice and men. Nothing bad happened because Lenny cared too much. It happened because his care turned into control. His love turned into fear, because holding on replaced allowing it to breathe. The tragedy was not that Lenny wanted a friend. The tragedy was that he didn't know any other way to keep one. And I kind of think that's where this conversation maybe lands, is most of us, especially if we are responsible for these types of situations, we're not trying to hurt the things that we love. We're trying to protect them and preserve them and make sure that they don't disappear. But somewhere along the way, that grip tightens and the air thins out. And instead of growth, we're actually straining things. And instead of providing continued progress, what we're actually doing is providing pressure. So I think a good question to ask ourselves to make sure that we aren't guilty of this is not, do I care enough about this thing? And instead, we need to be asking ourselves, have I left enough room for this to breathe and grow on its own without me being the person who is pushing it or controlling it? Because I really do think that the most responsible thing that you can do, the most loving thing that you can do, and probably the most effective thing that you can do is really just loosen your hands just enough to let life do what it's meant to do. I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And that does not mean that it's going to disappear. That does not mean that whatever it is going to be destined to fall apart. Instead, by loosening that grip, what you're doing is you're giving the thing room to flourish and grow as it's meant to. And again, I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but this is a situation, you guys, I have lived this firsthand, and I know how hard it is and how difficult it is and how heartbreaking it can be. And so if you are somebody who you're in a situation like this and you do just kind of feel like the life is being squeezed out of you, again, whether it's with a friendship, at work, in, a family business, whatever that may be, I see you, and I know that you're probably doing all of the right things. And I think the best thing that you can do is really check yourself and make sure that the thing that's happening to you now is not the thing that you are doing to other people or other causes or other elements of your life. To really, truly live and lead by example, that is something that I have really found a lot of comfort in. I think to myself, if this is something that is the thing that keeps me up at night, how is it that I make sure that I am not doing this to my own children or to my own employees or to my own friends, and just really being the type of leader that I want to have in life and that I want to surround myself with in life. So I hope you guys enjoyed our episode today. As always, we will be back here next week with a brand new episode of the show. Again, I feel like I was a little rusty today, but we're going to get some of those kinks worked out. Who do we have as a guest next week? Oh, I don't want to spill the beans. You guys are going to love this. It is going to be such a great episode. So you'll have to stay tuned until then. If this was an episode that was meaningful to you, the best thing that you can do for yourself and for us, honestly, is to share this episode with a friend, because chances are if you needed this message, somebody else in your life does as well. And as always, it is so rewarding to see this content get shared out to as many people as possible, just knowing how much effort and attention our entire team gives this gives this show. So thank you guys for always being the best cheerleaders, for being the best supporters, the absolute best listeners on the planet. We are so very grateful for you. We'll find you here next week.
If you loved this episode, do us a favor and share it with someone else who might find just as much value in it as you did. We're on a mission to continue to grow and strengthen the future of agriculture and Western industries, and you spreading the word helps us make more of a positive impact. It also makes a big difference when you take a minute to go rate and review the show. We can't thank you enough for listening, for sharing, and for loving Ag and Western as much as we do. We'll see you back here for our next episode.